So I'm going to copy the name of the ID so I don't misspell it in my style sheet. And let's just go ahead and let's make a style for that. And we're going to say that it has a position. And let's make sure that this position is fixed, because remember, fixed does not depend on any relative parents or anything like that. So we'll say it's a fixed position. Let's make it based on the bottom. So we'll say bottom 0, because remember, everything is going to be critically oriented to the bottom. And we'll say left is 0. And we'll say that it's got 100% width, right? So that the thing will go 100% wide. We'll save this. And then let's give it that background image. And we'll do the URL, images, /, and then over here, if you look on the left, we call it road rear hills. So road-rear-hills.png. And then basically we want it to be the same properties as this up here. So I can just copy that. And I need to make sure that there's a space there, right? And again, the background size is going to also be cover. So we can copy that as well. Let's save that. And this time, let's say that we're going to give it a Z index, even though there's nothing else on the page really with a Z index that's going to trump it yet. But let's just put it somewhere in the middle. Let's just say like 100. And then we can put anything up on top of that that's like at 200 or something. So let's just save that, and let's see. Oh, and we haven't set the height. That's the other thing that's missing. So we have the width. Well, the height, we need to make sure that it behaves like a background cover would for the viewport. Well, the viewport is always going to be as tall as the viewport is. So that's what we're going to use, is we're going to use VH for viewport height as the unit of measure. So the height of this is going to be VH. That means that it's always going to be basically exactly the same size as the viewport if the width is 100% and the height is 100 VH. So let's save that. And let's go back over here and do a quick test. Hit refresh. And then now you see we've got yet another layer, which is pretty cool. All right. And you probably can't tell because the text is dark, but the text is actually on top. You see here, it's on top of the text, right? Okay, but the actual regular text is, actually the regular text is also behind it, but we haven't adjusted that yet. So we can give the regular text a higher Z index as well, okay? So I jump back here into my style sheet, and let's just go ahead and do that just really quickly. Let's go ahead and make something so that we know that the, for instance, that the H1, let's just go down here, we'll make a new rule, let's just be consistent here. We'll make a rule up here for H1 that is separate, that is not also with the H2, and we're going to have it with a position not of absolute, not of fixed, but of relative, because remember, relative will keep it within the document flow. However, it will give it the option of having a Z index attached to it. So we'll give it a Z index that is definitely going to be behind the hills. So let's tell it to be, if the hills are 100, let's tell it to be, I don't know, like 50. Okay. And let's also go ahead and, for right now, we're going to do stanzas. So let's do, if you look over here at the HTML real quick, see we have section ID stanzas. So remember the stanzas are going to be different. All right, so we can say, let's say section pound stanzas, like that. And then we can give that, I'm going to copy this position in the Z index just to start. I'm not doing any other styling right now except for so that we can see what's going on. So position relative, and this time the Z index actually needs to be higher than 100 so that it comes in front of the hills. So let's make it like 200 just for simplicity. Okay, and let's save that. Oh, and then other thing I can do, just for like the sake of testing, that's it. I'm going to make the color of the text, let's make it something like super, like a deep pink, like a really bright pink, something that's going to be really easy to read. All right, and then if you were to like click on that, you could change it or whatever with your command click or control click. So I'm going to save this, and let's go back over here and do a refresh, and let's see if in fact whenever I scale it, aha, see, so now the text is in front of those hills, which is right, but the hills are in front of the H1. And if you want to just be certain because you're not sure, we can make the color of the H1, let's make it like Dodger blue, something really bright. It's sad that I actually remember all these color names. So let's do a refresh over here, and then you'll see for sure that the rear hills are covering up the H1, but the pink is still in front. So that's just what we want now. Okay, now the next thing that we can do is let's make the other thing that's not, it's not the mid rear hills anymore. I'm going to just copy this whole thing because there's a lot that's going to be the same though. And instead of that name, I'm going to call it Top Road. Okay, so I'm going to copy that ID name and go back over here, and we're going to change that. Okay, so position is still fixed, bottom 0, left 0, all of this stuff is true. It's just the image is going to be different and the Z index is going to be different. So let's change the name of the image. So the name of the image, if you look to the left, is going to be called Road Top Layer. Okay, so let's change that, Road dash Top dash Layer. And then we want to give it a higher Z index. Well, we can't give it 200 because 200 is for the stanzas, and the stanzas, remember, are supposed to go underneath the top road. So the top road needs to probably be like 300. Let's do a test. And we refresh it, and you see that, in fact, it is working as expected. And so if we do something like this and we scroll, you can see it's coming out from behind the hills. All right. Now, granted, this doesn't look the way we want it to because we haven't done any kind of styling on the text other than, make it just really bright and visible. Okay. So, but this is really cool because all of a sudden, really quickly, we've already got this sort of kind of complex thing going on with these hills, right? And if you do it really big like this, you can also see it working, but the problem is that now it won't scroll. The text is stuck back there because we need to actually do some stuff with that text to make it a little bit more visible so that it's got like more space to scroll. Okay, so let's do some basic stuff. First of all, let's go over to our stanzas and our H1 and so forth, and let's just go ahead and let's tell it to have a width. Let's just start with like 80% and see how that fares. And then we're also going to give it a margin. And for right now, let's just start with 0 on the top and bottom. And let's say auto for left and right. That'll give us a good starting place. And let's just make it the same for the H1 as well so that it's consistent. We'll deal with the H2 separately. Let's just save that. And let's just start there and see at least how that works for us in terms of centering stuff in a different way. And it's kind of nice when it does this, right? If we have it like this, you can see that it comes up. Now, the other thing too is that when it does this, like we still have this problem that you can't see the cool effect of it. So let's go over here and let's make some modifications to the code. One of the things that we don't have is, if you look over here, is we have H1 rules, or a rule, but we don't have anything for the header. So let's go ahead and make something for the header. In fact, let's do this really quickly. Let's go to view, we'll move to split view. And for right now, I'm going to toggle that closed so that we can get a better view of what's going on here. And so while I'm over here, I'll put header above the H1 since H1 is actually nested inside of the header. Now let's do a few things. First of all, one of the things that I did was I made the width of the H1 80%. Let's actually take that out and let's make the header have a width of 80%. And the other thing too is that let's give it a height so that it's got something more substantial for us to work with. So let's do something like, I don't know, 30 VH maybe. Oops, let's do the word height and give it like maybe 30 VH. And the reason for that is that if you look over here, I'm just going to save that. If you look over here, because everything else is based on viewport height, it might make sense for the type to also be based on viewport height. So let's do that. And actually, oh, and then we also want it to be automatically centered. So let's do margin. And then for the top, instead of having it rest right up on top of the edge of the viewport, let's maybe say that it's got a 10% top margin, and then if we're doing it clockwise, we'd say auto for the right, 0 for now for the bottom, and auto for the left. And let's save that, and let's just see what that does. And we refresh the page, and that looks a lot better. All right, so the problem now is that because the whole poem ends up being, you know, still on the page, it stops because technically, even though we can't see the poem is still underneath here, and it's fully showing up on the page. It's when you do this, you know, that you start to see it. So we need to be able to scroll, and we'll deal with that in just a minute, but at least we have this a little bit better for the heading up here. We can also try, let's just see, for instance, if we go down to stanzas and we tell it that we want it to be viewport height of 100. So let's say the height is 100 VH, and let's save that if we're going to do a preview. So, all right, and you see that in fact that is helpful. Okay, so now we've got something that is scrolling a lot better, and it's kind of doing what we want it to do. All right, now we need to deal with that footer with the H2. Okay, so you'll notice that we can't see it. It's probably down here behind the road. And if you wanted to just double check and see, if you need to know that for sure, you can right click this and inspect it. Don't forget that this is an option. And the top position, you can just turn the background image off, and there it is. In fact, it's the link that we were looking for. Okay, so we can turn that back on. All right, that might be helpful for you to remember that you can do that. Okay, so let's see about making some changes there. First of all, it's in the footer. If you look here, we have the footer with the H2 inside of it. So we can go to the bottom of the CSS and we can just add it down there. So let's make a rule for footer in our CSS file. And I guess one of the first things that we might want to do is go ahead and tell it to have width of 100%. All right, just it should anyway, but we'll just be explicit. And let's go ahead and tell it to have a height. So let's do a height of like 100 VH. And the reason I'm doing that, let's just see what that looks like, is because ultimately in the end, I want it to kind of cover up this whole page when I change the position. So I'm going to hit refresh here, and then we're going to come up, and then you see that it actually takes up a lot more space now. Here, let's close that. And the thing that's nice about that is that by the time it like actually is allowed to scroll itself up, we can position this word or these words, this H2 Elizabeth Hobbs, so that it's sort of more centered. And the way to do that then would be to make the footer relative with a child that is absolute. So we could say position relative. Because remember, absolute children of relative parents will be absolutely positioned relative to its relative parent. So if we were to then say footer H2, for instance, oops, H2, then we could come in here and tell it to be position absolute. And text align center and top, since it's absolute, we don't use a margin, it's just top. Let's do about 40% or so. So it's closer to the center. And we need to tell it how wide to be. So let's say 100%. Then we'll save it and test it. And you'll see here now that it does show up in the center. In the next video, I'll show you how to make a more dramatic effect with a darker color on top of everything.